This is our technology career chat. We're pleased to have with us two distinguished center alums. We have Brian Mefford, who is the founder and CEO of CNX. That's a company that's dedicated to expanding broadband by mapping and brokering the world's digital assets. He's also a member of the Center Board of Trustees. And then we also have Luke Hatcher, who is a senior software engineer at Pandora. We especially appreciate you joining us early. Probably quite a bit earlier out there. And I've been told his first job was at the IT department at Center.
Yay! No idea.
And we survived him being there.
So what we're going to do, I've asked them to just give a little bit of an overview of their career path up to date, up to this point in the technology field, and then give any suggestions, key pointers that they might have for preparing for a career in technology, breaking into a technology career, and after that we'll open it up for some questions and answers from you guys. And I think Drew Strauss and Luke was going to kick us off.
Sure. It was great to be with you all. Thanks all for coming. Especially good to see familiar faces back there. I'll try and sort of share a few things just quickly. I don't know I have a ton of great advice, but also if after this any questions that come up, feel free to reach out. Luke at luke.io. I'll send around contact info or any of that stuff. You can talk to Dr. Shannon on anything like that later on. But so hi, my name's Luke. I graduated in 2006. I had a computer science degree, and essentially my first job right out of Center was working in ITS. Was relieved. I had done no sort of pre-planning for my career. I hadn't really thought about it a ton. And then it all just sort of worked out nicely. I've had the fortune and the privilege in life of many things just sort of happening, and I often feel I've not sort of planned enough for them in the future. But it was just a killer first job those first 5 years. I was doing a mixture of IT support stuff, but then also sort of keep my eye on things that sort of got me excited, which was sort of custom software development, improving things. Maybe if we had an issue in the office, maybe sort of scripting around it, something like that. So I think that's a common thread you'll see sort of just through all this sort of stuff is do what's important, show up to work, do the work, but then also sort of keep in mind the sorts of things that you like doing and the sorts of things that make you want to get up each morning. I think that's an important sort of thing through this. So through the 5 years at ITS, again, mostly started out doing support with a bit of application development, did a lot more custom things, did some stuff with the academic database, just all sorts of stuff there. Some of it more fun, some of it more sort of scary. Like the one that kept me up at night was the tornado warning system, that sort of thing. I think that was like my last year we really sort of started rolling that out. And just worrying that email list was up to date. It was just something that I would sort of wake up and go, that sort of thing. So things like that happen, and that's okay. But there are also sort of other projects we worked on that were a lot of fun. So towards the end of those 5 years, probably about 3 years in, I had been doing just some open source development and sorts of things, working on technologies that I wasn't getting to work on sort of in the day. And that was cool because, we had certain things at work, and I never sort of expect that. The things I like to work on as a hobby don't always line up with job, and that's another thing you sort of have to sort of make room for. And so I was doing a bit of custom development at night, started contracting a little bit, and what I found was that the income from that sort of work is quite lucrative, and so that sort of thing starts to become sort of interesting after time. So that's an interesting area. At some point, though, I'd done so much work outside that it made sense for me to consider that full time, just to bring some sanity back to life, have some time back in the evenings to sort of work on that stuff. So at that point, basically went and worked for a small startup of like 4 full-time employees called Eldarian. We basically were doing agency work for all Discovery Channel, PBS at one point, just tons of a couple of really early startups, that sort of thing. So a lot of money coming through the door, a lot of just different stuff, maybe every hour of the day. So it's pretty wild stuff to work on. And I think those first 7-ish years were sort of like forging in the fire. So that was just a ton of exposure, Sort of had a lot of exposure to little projects. I may have worked on something for 3 days, but it's still something that people want to talk about when they see it on a resume. That's another sort of, if I have some takeaways that I'll list at the end, that's something I find that's important. Another sort of thing that happened during this is I had an acquaintance at Center, a young man, 2 years younger I think than myself, graduated, Will Larson, who's now, I forget his official title, he works at Uber now. We both live here in the Bay Area. And we had worked on sort of hobbyist iOS development in the early, like the first year of iOS development, even before it was sort of public. And we basically just did a game for fun. He was in Japan with teaching English to students there and all that stuff, and had a ton of time, was eating peanut butter. It was his only food. And so we basically worked on sort of iOS development for probably about 6 months and launched a game, made a little bit of money. It all sat in a bank account, still there, trying to survive, like, years and years of tax returns and all that stuff with the state. So that's all sitting there. It was a fun, great thing, good exposure. Again, something that people like to talk about in sort of interviews and that sorts of thing. So after that, basically, I'd sort of hit a point though where, again, I was working at home from Danville actually for this company out of Boston. And there were 4 of us, tons of pressure, just working all the time, driving me nuts. And I'd sort of hit a breaking point. I was like, I need to simplify. I need an office job, need to see people again, which is very important to me. Lots of people back there made a lot of days great. Susan, Shane, I see y'all back there. I love working with people, and that was something that I sort of needed. So again, stay cognizant of the things that you enjoy in life and sort of keep that in mind for sort of future planning. So at that point, I was actually a day away from interviewing again with Center to actually come back. I was so excited. It was going to be kind of an iffy thing to sort of work out. And I got this odd email from Will Larson, who was working at a company called Social Code in San Francisco. And he had no idea I was doing an interview. He really had no idea I was unhappy sort of in my current job, and basically said, come out here, this is your job, come out and do it, all this stuff. I was about to turn 30, and I just sort of panicked. I went and woke my wife up. It was like 11 o'clock at night. And basically we decided at that point, let's move to San Francisco. Mm-hmm. And so I called, I think I sent an email at like midnight and said, sorry, I'm not going to come in for the interview tomorrow. I think I've just made a decision. And it was the weirdest thing in my life. I'm a pretty sort of boring person. And so that sort of change for me was something that I feel like had I waited another year, you turn 30 and your life's over. That's sort of what I was thinking at the time. But, ended up working out just amazing. So I spent another 2 years at Social Code. That was the first time in my career I'd ever focused on a single portion of development. And that was doing front-end development, sort of JavaScript in the browser, that sorts of things. I'd always done that a bit, but it was the first time I'd ever really focused. I found that was a really relieving thing to be able just to sort of key in on one area and just like go deep. And that was a ton of fun. Sort of can sort of pigeonhole you as a sort of single talent developer, but I think it's important, again, to keep developing other things in that time while also sort of doing all that. So life became much more sane. I still don't leave the house much because, the sun is dangerous if you. But I found that returning to office life, maybe I'm a bit older too, so that worked out well. It was a great move for me. After about 2 years at Social Code, basically had moved to the East Bay. Didn't really enjoy the commute. Some other stuff, we'd had tons of change at the company, and I felt as though it was the time to change there. And so about 6 months ago, I actually decided to leave Social Code. My friend Will had left, probably a year and a half prior. He had come over from the Dig acquisition. I think was pretty burned out. So it was a company that had done a ton. We did a ton of stuff, launched a product, and I was like, this is a good time to go. So I had one company in mind. This is maybe the interesting point here. I only wanted to work at Pandora, which is where I am now. It's a company, when I was at Center, I forget, 2005, I guess I would have been a junior-ish or senior. Yeah, senior, I think. And there was another student there, Peter Burns, who was like, you got to check out this website. And so I still have the emails that I sent to the company like December 1st, 2005. And it was basically like, I like this old guy, he's dead, and you don't have him on your website. And one of the co-founders of the company sort of wrote me back. And it was just a very personal, like, hey, thanks for listening. Cool to see you. Cool. And that guy still works here, which is really cool. Met him, and I'd sort of, all that stuff. But seeing the company, I live, right across the street, so which is kind of amazing over here. So I never drive anywhere. That sort of thing. I sort of set my sights on that. Did a big interview process. So tons of experience on the recent experience on the interview stuff. If you have any questions there. But basically did a ton of interviews beforehand. Didn't even submit an application to Pandora until like a month and a half into the search, knowing full well that I just wanted to get a few offers under my belt so I didn't get nervous. I get nervous often. And so basically when I came into Pandora, it just worked out wonderfully. Met the team, talked to the recruiter a ton. Another key thing is talking to recruiters. Good recruiters are amazing. Bad recruiters are the worst people you'll ever have talk to you. But tech recruiters, any recruiters for sort of talent stuff, just if you get the right relationships in place, it can sort of set you up for a lot of success in the future. So that was something I sort of stumbled upon, and life at Pandora is great. So working on the sort of ads team here, again, moving back to a more generalized role and loving it. I've been here for about, I guess, 3 months, 4 months. So that's sort of the stuff I have right away. I don't want to take up too much time. So does that sound good?
You're up, Ryan. Thank you, Luke.
Let's hear it for Luke. That's fun stuff, and that's a hard act to follow. And I'll tell you that I'm a big fan. My family's a fan, Luke, of Pandora. You guys kind of provide the soundtrack for my family on evenings and weekends. So thank you.
Thank you.
So guys, I'm going to talk about just a bit about my background, but kind of touch on maybe some more important themes, maybe some more relevant themes for you guys about starting companies. I've made a career out of being in startup companies or starting new companies myself, and so we'll really address that. And tie that back to Center. I mean, really, Center provided the foundation and the motivation for me, taking that path. And I can't overemphasize, the importance of the Center network for your career paths. Never be shy about tapping in to other Center alumni or accessing, getting feedback from those folks, and just don't hesitate to do that. So for me, that started on campus. Certainly, when I was studying in London, I happened, by chance to start playing rugby with a group of guys who went to a school called Thunderbird, which I'd heard a bit about, but I got to know them. It's a business school, international business school out in Arizona. Got to know them here. I heard more about their school, and I thought, well, that sounds intriguing. A neat place to potentially think about going to business school. Ended up graduating, followed my girlfriend at the time, now my wife, to Louisville. Went to work for a startup, my first startup, and the owner of that company, the founder of that company, had gone to Thunderbird. And so that was a neat connection. So he kind of set me up after working for a few years there. I ended up going to Thunderbird. And developed a lot of good relationships there, was able to study entrepreneurship. And, the interesting thing, I'm couching my remarks in terms of starting businesses versus being an entrepreneur. I think sometimes, people will introduce themselves as an entrepreneur, and in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, that means they don't get along well with others. They don't like authority. And then sometimes, when people will introduce themselves as a serial entrepreneur, and I think, well, that means they really don't get along well with others or can't hold down a job. I jest, of course. I mean, but yeah, there is entrepreneurship that is, separate from starting companies. I mean, you can be an entrepreneur wherever you are. So in any company, entrepreneurship is really about identifying and solving problems. And so you can do that regardless of where you are. But anyway, my wife and I were married. She's Center 94. I'm Center 95. We moved to Arizona to go to school at Thunderbird. From there, we ended up reconnecting with my center roommate who had taken a job in New York. And so I followed him to that company, which happened to be at the time, sort of a quintessential .com analyst company. By the way, that roommate was John Ferris. He's your current chief investment officer and chief financial officer there at Center. So he called me and he said, I've gone to work for this great company. We're an analyst firm analyzing .com startups. So I had the opportunity to then go to that company and really be a student of these new companies that were, solving the newest issues and innovating, in the late 90s, early 2000s, and also, watched the demise of many of those companies. So learned some hard lessons. Interestingly, after September 11th, 2001, the company where we were working folded, just couldn't survive that time being in Manhattan. Several of us had the opportunity to sort of pick up the pieces and go start companies based on the intellectual property of that company in other places. So we moved to the Washington, D.C. area. So that gave us an opportunity to sort of absorb the fact that in life, out of the ashes, almost literally, you can sort of take stock, look around, and realize, that there are opportunities that you need to consider and take advantage of. After being in DC for a while, we started another company and sold that in order to be able to move back to Kentucky. And so that sort of brings us nearly up to date. That was about 15 years ago. 2 or 3 companies later, I'm now am the founder of this software company, Connected Nation Exchange, where we focus on helping communications companies find properties, locations where they can put antennas and hardware and equipment in order to bolster their cellular networks or wireless broadband networks and so forth. So that's just a bit about my path, and I give you that as a way of saying, there have been various significant lessons for me along that path. But again, particularly coming back to the Center network and realizing that I've been able to call on friends and acquaintances and just others who have been in cities that I've relocated to, or in the industry that I've been in, to provide help along the way. So, with that said, there's 5 key points that I want to just kind of leave you with before turning it over to questions, in honor of President Roush, by the way. One, that we're in sort of the most unique time in modern history, literally. I mean, it's not hyperbole to say that we're in the most unique time in modern history for being able to start businesses. And Pandora is representative of that. 2, entrepreneurship, starting businesses isn't for everybody. 3, you have to know where to start. 4, what to do, and 5, when to start. And so let me just briefly touch on each of those things. And by the way, I give a talk like this that focuses particularly on the first point. And it's called Invent Yourself a Job. And so if you have any interest in Googling that, there's more available online about the fact that on that first point, this most unique time in history, in modern history, for being able to start businesses, particularly because of information technology and communications technology. And so the fact that you can, in your mind, on one day, have an idea, whether it's like Luke, for a game that he could have the ability to code, or a service that you think could address a particular need or challenge or problem, and literally the next day have a URL, have registered a business, and begin through social media and otherwise connecting not to tens or hundreds or thousands of people, but millions of people. I mean, just consider how mind-blowing that is. And in literally a matter of days, you can go from idea to reality with a business concept. And again, you can use that regardless of whether you're starting a business on your own or you have an idea for a new service within whatever business you're working. That's a powerful concept that we need not ever lose appreciation for. Second point, that entrepreneurship isn't for everyone. For some people, it's the only option. I mean, I was sort of joking about, being an entrepreneur means, you don't dislike authority or you don't get along with others. But I mean, in part, there's some truth in that, because, having an idea for a business and pursuing that, does require some amount of courage to say, I'm the person who can address this, who can go solve this issue, and then sticking to that kind of vision. It's not for everybody. I mean, there are ups and downs involved with that. And again, whether that's inside a company or on your own, it can be sort of a lonely proposition. Even again, inside a company, if you're the person that's sort of raising your hand and saying, I've identified this issue, I want to be the one to address it. Sometimes depending on corporate culture, that may not go over that well. But hopefully, if you're that person with that personality, you've found the company that embraces that, and certainly that should be part of your aspiration for a career and for a company. Where to start? Entrepreneurship starts wherever you are. I mean, it starts as a student, and again, regardless of what your first job is, I just encourage you to be that person who's looking for those challenges that need to be solved. Looking for those solutions that have not yet been delivered or are being delivered inadequately. I mean, much of the success of Silicon Valley is driven by companies that are solving issues, that have innovated new ways of solving old problems, and so that will remain sort of a core truth for quite some time. But what to do? I'm asked that a lot. I'm interested in starting a business. Deciding what to do is my challenge. Really, I mean, Luke touched on it earlier. It's finding, tapping into that personal passion. Again, whether you're deciding to start a new company or you're just looking for courage to be an entrepreneur within the company where you're working, you have to be driven by personal passion. I think entrepreneurship looks a lot like life on mission in some ways. I mean, at our church, we send out missionaries regularly who are going in obscure places far away because they are driven by a passion to go reach people. And so similarly, as an entrepreneur, you have to tap into that kind of passion that others may not at first be equally motivated by. So there are lots of parallels there. That can be exhilarating, exhausting, lonely, and heroic. And you can go through all those kinds of feelings and emotions on the same day. Again, similar to those who are living their life on mission. When to start is the fifth and final point. Again, I mentioned it earlier. The time to start is now. There's no reason, again, given the time that we live in, the technology that's available, that if you have interest, particularly in if you come to this talk today, you probably do have interest in being in the technology space. There's just no reason to wait. If you have ideas, if you have passion for solving challenges or creating new opportunities, innovating ways that can address old ways of doing things, there's no reason not to start today. You can start with experiments. That's another beauty of the time that we live in. Again, not hyperbole to say it's unique in modern history, because again, at very little cost, you can experiment with starting businesses, and you can experiment with entrepreneurship by taking steps, tapping into markets, using social media to gauge responses. I mean, it used to cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to do market surveys that reasonable sample size that now you can do for free by posting questions on social media. I mean, that's a phenomenon that can be leveraged for starting businesses. So if for no other reason, do these things to increase your return on investment for your center education. You have a unique set of opportunities given where you're studying, and so the fact that you can study abroad, and probably most of you have already, that's an opportunity to see other markets, gain insights into other markets about how you may be able to work in those markets, or again, start companies if that's of interest in those markets. So you have that opportunity to really increase the return on your investment in your center education. So with that, I'll stop. But it's great to be with you guys today.
Questions?
Real quick, Luke, when are you coming back to center?
Hopefully tomorrow.
Okay, all right.
I need to come back home. Yeah.
Luke, you mentioned you'd recently gone through interview process. I mean, either of you can speak about, this is probably something we're all going to be doing pretty shortly here, sometime in the next couple of years at least.
Yeah.
So things should we look forward to seeing in interviews that we may not expect?
Sure. Yeah. So there are 2 points on this. I think Brian hit on one that's amazing, which is the network aspect of this. So there's no greater asset you can have than a leg up. And so leg ups can be anything. It could be knowing someone at the company. It could be knowing a lot about the company, a good connection with a recruiter, that sort of thing. So I think the first thing is that's always nice to have. The interesting thing about my experience with Pandora is I didn't have really any of that. I'd had a lot of interest in the job, but I know I'm still getting to know people here, but I don't have any real like close friends here, as I've sort of had in other spots before. So that's that can be, I'm glad I didn't think about it at the time, because that's a little scary when you're going to a place where you know no one. I mean, it turns out when I sat down the first day, there were 4 Kentuckians within 10 feet of me. So immediately I had sort of friends. We talked basketball, that sort of thing. Those things take care of themselves eventually, but I think that's the first thing. So again, that networking aspect came up huge for me by chance, just that strange email out of the blue. I think it's tempting to think, try and find those people for you, people who you have a lot of respect for and that sort of thing. They sort of just help you out in your career. But the other thing I would hit upon is try to be that person as well. This is something I've sort of learned through this. Had my friend not reached out to me, and it wasn't like out of altruism, he needed someone to do a job at the place where he was managing people. And so it worked out for everybody, but that sort of thing. Always keep in mind the people that you've met along the way, whether you were friends or not. Will and I actually weren't great friends at Center. We had a few classes together. We made fun of the same other students. We had like a couple, like, oh, that guy in class, that sort of thing. But we didn't actually like talk a lot at Center, but we sort of knew what we worked on, that sort of thing. So that was key. The actual interview aspect, I think another thing that Brian hit upon, that sort of always be exploring your sort of things that you're interested in, and that stuff can come from anywhere. That sort of thing that you work on for a day. So I have like a 2-year-old now, and a couple things, when I had sort of decided to sort of switch roles, I sort of took some time and just, I should have been doing like drills to like remember the stuff that Dr. Shannon and Dr. Bradshaw were trying to teach me, 10 years ago, that I'd forgotten about algorithms and like, that sort of stuff that can still come up on interviews. Even after you have, years of experience, you'll still get asked a question about balancing like a red-black tree, that sorts of stuff. I'm only a few months away and I've already forgotten a lot of this stuff, but you don't do all that stuff every day. So you forget some of the knowledge along the way. And that applies to any field, I'm sure. But especially so with algorithms and those sorts of things. And so I think when I was sort of, oh, sorry, I forget what the point I was making was. How weird is that? Always being quick, but yeah. So I have a kid who's about 2, and so I basically decided all the games on the iPad stunk. She just wants to see a cow. You know, the ones that we had, I didn't want to pay a lot of money for them. The cows didn't move. Just use like, you know, public domain, like music and clip art, that sorts of stuff. So I wanted to make my own. And what actually happened was the new Apple TV came out. Ended up doing a couple things based off of that. Did some code with just some really simple game engines and that sorts of stuff. Nothing ever ended up really being something that she would enjoy, but it was something that I was able to talk about in my interviews, and those sorts of things, fairly or not fairly, can sometimes overshadow the actual hard work that you come in and do every day. And so I think it's important to sort of keep those fires sort of lit. It doesn't mean that you're spending a lot of time, you know, woodworking, but if that's something you enjoy and that's something that you have a connection with someone that you talk to, and that's something you can show that you have maybe an attention to detail or anything like that can come out in an interview. Those are the sorts of things that actually can sometimes be more important than your GPA and that sorts of stuff, especially a few years out. Because ultimately what people are looking for is someone that they want to work with. It doesn't mean that, I often say like the rock star developer or the rock star, you know, support person, sales person, all that stuff. In sales, you can actually be a rock star and be a complete jerk and you're probably okay. But in most other fields, you're looking for someone that you want to wake up and not go, oh, I have to go in and work with him again or her again, that sorts of stuff. So I think that's really key. As far as technical sort of bits on the interview stuff, I did find there are a couple of really helpful sites. I don't remember them all off the top of my head. I think Interview Bit or Interview Tips. Basically all these sorts of sites where you go and do these sort of puzzles. You know, puzzle 1 is try and sort an array without, with one of your eyes closed or something like that. Lots of little challenges like that. And I find that pick a language. When I interviewed at Pandora is mostly Java, but we actually are more Python, and I'm trying to help on that. I love Python. I've always mostly done Python, but so we're trying to work on that a bit. But when I interviewed, a lot of the people that I interviewed with were Java developers. They didn't care. I was doing Python on the board. That's what I had decided to focus entirely on as I did algorithms, partially for language features, mostly for comfort, that sorts of things. Pick your lane, go for it. If you get to a place and they don't know Python, that's okay. Just don't let it bother you. Write the algorithm, explain it, talk through things a lot. That's really, really key. I think once I figured that bit out, I had a few, and I knew this was going to happen. So it's, and it's going to happen to you. You're going to have a few really rough experiences early on because you don't know what's good and what's bad. You don't know how you'll react to the pressure until you actually get in the spot. But don't let it discourage you. I was discouraged there for a bit. I have friends who recently just went through the same process too, and they were also very discouraged at points. It always works out. Not always, but it usually works out quite well. Just, keep your head down, keep working hard, that sorts of stuff. So I think that's probably it. That's probably my advice in total. Again, I think experience with a recruiter, sort of the relationship that you develop with the people you talk to first, they can be your advocate in the process. So the recruiter that I actually talked to initially at Pandora, Andre, it turns out that my boss, his last 3 jobs, his last 4 offers came through his connection with Andre. So Andre initially got him a job at I think HP, working on the WebOS thing that came over from Palm. And that was such a scary and disastrous project that a year later, Andre called him up and said, "Hey, I'm sorry about that." But there's this other company that's starting up called Beats. And I think this really has you written all over it. And so they got to talk and work through it. He ended up getting doing, I think he was like director or manager of web engineering at Beats, which is a pretty cool title. He claims that it's not that cool, but eventually got acquired by Apple, worked at Apple there for about a year, launching the Apple Music. Lots of experience, good and bad. It's great to talk to people like that when you do get these connections, learn more about good experiences, bad experiences in companies. He actually got another offer from Andre in the meantime to go work at Uber when Andre was there. And then eventually Andre poached him over here to Pandora. So a relationship with a recruiter, I don't want to say that's typical, but remember your network. That could be Center. It could be the weird guy on the street you meet with a beard. It could be, you never know where people are going to come from. So be friendly. Also, the thing that helped me, sorry, one last point, I know I've gone really long on this. The sort of networking stuff too that was key for me early on was in like the early days of Twitter. That's actually where Will and I probably talked the most before we ended up working on sort of iOS development and stuff, just finding something to actually work on together. Blog posting, like those were the early days when you could do this stuff and not everybody was. So it's a bit tough now. And it's like I should have invented the telephone before someone else did too, but that's okay. But I find that sorts of things, getting your name out there so that when you get to the interview process and people can get a sense of who you are, I find that, there are horror stories of social media and people, saying something silly or something like that, and then completely like ruining your chance at getting a job. I find that that's usually I've never had a person who I've decided no based on their presence. Sometimes you might see something and you worry like, oh, maybe they curse a lot or something, like if that's a problem. But to me, that's never been a discounting sort of thing. But what I do find is I've probably hired people who show communication skills and that sorts of things, their interests. Those sorts of things can actually really help give an idea for the interviewer to know sort of who they're dealing with and pull the best parts of you out, because that's always the goal. You want to find the best person to work with and that sorts of stuff. So I find that putting yourself out there if you can, I know that's a luxury I was able to do early on with open source because I had a lot of free time, I had no kids and stuff. I don't know how we do it now, but find a way, find a way to express your interest, that sorts of stuff. Always very, very helpful.
Thank you.
Now let the pro come in. Brian, do you have any? Brian's the pro.
No, those great tips. The only thing I would add comes from an interview that I absolutely blew one time. Those are the hard lessons you don't forget, right? And I'm sure you're already learning and being coached on how to respond and how to react to particular questions. And you can't beat preparation ever. But at the same time, when it gets down to the toughest questions, as Luke said, I mean, you have to let you come through. There was one particular interview where I was so excited. It was one of the biggest technology companies in the world at the time. It was part marketing, part technical job, and I was asked a marketing question about, if I'm on an airplane and I can't get out of my seat, but I have an idea for a new product that I immediately want to market around the plane, how do I develop it on the device that I have and then get the word out? And anyway, it was one of those kinds of questions. And I just started thinking in my mind, what is the answer that she wants right now? And that's the total wrong approach. And instead of just thinking, how would I address? She asked me how I would address it. I just started thinking about what she wanted to hear, and that's again, it was disastrous. So I knew at the end of my answer to that question, I did not have that job, and I did not get that job. So let you come through.
Yeah. Good start. Yeah, I wanted to ask Brian, what are some of the most common most common challenges that a fledgling startup would face, and how would you start to solve those?
Money.
Right.
Money's always a challenge. So, depending on what kind of business what kind of idea you have, you just have to decide, is it the type of thing that you can shoestring? Can you grow something organically? So as you have success, you can put money back into the business. Plenty of opportunities like that. Or is this something that's, very innovative and is going to take time? It's going to take time to demonstrate and improve itself. I know I can do it. but it's going to take time. Then if you're early in your startup career, then the reality is you have to tap it again. You have to tap into your own network, your own friends and family, and you just have to be sometimes swallow your pride or be courageous and just start going to that network and laying it on the line with them. They're usually in a startup kind of situation on any given day. You might wake up and there's probably 675 reasons why you should not be starting the business. And you have to find the one reason that motivates you to do it. If you're starting a business, you've said, I have a unique ability to solve a problem that nobody else is solving, or nobody else is solving in a way that I think is adequate. And so because of that, all the other people who have attempted to address it are going to be the ones who are doubters. And so you're constantly sort of bombarded with that kind of doubt, which you just have to have confidence in yourself and that courage. I mean, you'll see if you go look at that piece on Invent Yourself a Job. At the end, I show a piece from the New Zealand All Blacks. But before they take the rugby pitch, they all get together and do what's called the haka, which is an ancient battle ritual. And I talk about, as somebody who starts a company, you almost have to get out of bed in the morning and do your own individual haka. I mean, you got to go to battle every day. So that's the kind of mentality you have to have.
Thank you.
What would you say the job market is like right now for straight out of undergrad computer science majors?
Luke, why don't you take that? You're in a good spot to answer that question out there.
Sure. Yeah. So I think this is another thing, that sort of leg up that I talked about, whether that's network or luck, whatever have you. I think one thing that's key and this is important because I didn't do it. And so I didn't do any internships, that sorts of stuff. I find that especially at a big company like Pandora, this is the first time I've worked at a company this large. It's always been sort of smaller places and sort of mid-tier before. Their intern programs are very developed. They filter out, people. I don't really exactly know how. I'm learning a bit about the process now, but basically that's a really great track to get a position in a company. That's something that for maybe it was, money pressure, geographical pressure, I'd never sort of took advantage of. I think that would be something that if you can do it, seems like a really great opportunity, even just experience that sorts of stuff. Also, I know that when we do interview sort of, I'll say fresher talent, that sorts of stuff, sort of straight out of college, internships are a quick way to show that, again, when you're interviewing, you're looking for those things that you can use to promote the person. Basically, like you're looking for the things that show that they would be a good candidate. And internships early on seem like a key way to go. Otherwise, I think obviously listing specified specific interests that you have, maybe if there was a focus. So at one project I worked on at Center with Ian Castor, we worked on, and I think a center term we took an independent study course or directed study course. Basically, the two of us sat and developed a Java applet. At that time, that you could do Java applets. They don't do them now, but we did a Java applet that did sort of a spectrum viewing of. I wasn't good at chemistry. Dr. Shannon knows my grades in that sort of category. So I don't know a lot about that stuff. But we built a thing that basically sort of graphed data on a website. It was pretty handy. Before that, I think it was a whole mess how they sort of had to do that process. This was all sort of automatic. The machine would do the magnets, and then it would bump out the data, and then it would automatically show up on the website. So you could just put your little piece of like copper, I don't know what you do, put it in the machine, spin it around, and then go home, and you can actually look at your data without sort of having to manually copy files over and that sorts of stuff, which they had to do before. So that was a project I think that helped out. Had I actually gone to do something, that's a project that I would have seen on someone's resume that they could have talked about, that I would have gotten a sense of the sorts of things they can do. working with someone to develop that, working with stakeholders in that case, so Dr. Musica, sort of her specifications for it, those sorts of process things are very important early on, because what you tend to see is actually a lot of the talent I find, especially now that I'm getting to be sort of an old fella, I find that the kids now are smarter than I am in a lot of areas. And so the key thing that you're looking for is how someone might work on a team. And it's not necessarily, do they have the raw skill? It's, do they have the amount of maturity needed for them to actually become like a really great member of a team? And, sometimes that works out. Some of us, I've had bad experiences on my own, where I wasn't mature enough for a given situation. That stuff's going to happen. But I find anything you can do to show that sort of upfront is pretty key. And I think a lot of that is sort of your experiences, the things that you like working on. Also, like nailing the interview stuff, the sort of, if you're on an airplane, if you do a good job on that stuff, it gives you a leg up. But, that stuff, sometimes I answer questions in a nice way, sometimes I don't. So definitely experiences and interests are a key thing.
Thank you.
I don't know if you want me to add to that, Kurt, but my perspective to the question is that the job market is visibly improved over the last 5 years. So, just in looking at employment data, particularly, and hiring data, certainly that's borne out in those data as well. You have to be willing to be mobile, to go to where the jobs are that are of interest to you. Somebody gave me good advice early in my initial job search, and they said it's always easier to find a job when you have a job. So I don't say that to encourage job hopping, but I certainly have interviewed folks who it became clear they were holding out for their ideal position, and I knew I didn't have their ideal position, so I wasn't going to hire them for something less. If they weren't really interested in anything that was lesser than their ideal. So the point is, sometimes to get inside a company that you're interested in working for, you take a job that may be less than your ideal, but understanding that you can work hard and demonstrate your prowess and work yourself up into the job that you do desire.
So Brian just answered the question that I've failed to answer, which was the job market. That's a good point to bring up. I want to say that I was a bit worried. So basically, I've had most of my experiences in the past have been I've switched jobs when I've felt as though I had no other choice. So whether it's taking so much of my time and bringing in so much income that it only made sense to devote my time to a job, as sort of when I sort of left center, which I still is one of my favorite jobs, and I'd love to come back and do it. I maybe want to retire as like an underling in ITS or something, or maybe just a lab rat for Dr. Musica or something. I don't know what, but what I found a few months ago was, for the first time, maybe it's because, again, I'm approaching end of life or something like that, I decided that I needed to find a good job, something that I actually wanted to go out. For the first time, I actually did a job search of my own instead of it sort of happening. And so at that point, I actually decided, after looking into it, that it was going to take so much of my time, and I cared so much about the work I was doing at the time, that I actually really did need to focus. And this is, again, like often I don't break from my tradition of stability and safety, and especially with a kid. It seemed like a silly idea at the time, and I thought it could go disastrously wrong. It ended up working out great. So I basically took a month, sort of wrapped up things, launched a product, had enough of a safety net that I knew that I could go for about 3-4 months without really sweating. And then basically there was a website I want to mention, and I don't get a kickback from them. Hired.com, I think. There are probably others like this, so I don't want to necessarily promote them just alone. But what actually happened, it was like a machine gun of jobs coming my way. A lot of them were probably garbage. It was like Intuit. I don't want to work at Intuit, but I'll talk to them. That's really, really key, just to get a lot of experience during that process. And And then you can sort of bounce these things off of each other, because I don't know why we do this, but when we recruit people, we ask them, so who else are you talking to? And oddly, like, that doesn't faze me, but it does some people. Some people really like to hear, like, oh, is Google talking to them? Google will talk to anyone, but their interview process is just wretched. Go through it, though. People often don't do it the first time. They don't succeed the first time. It's totally okay. Just go through these processes, learn more about the way they do. Google actually sort of makes you wait like 3 weeks before they'll even let you start. They'll send you a full email, like lots of resources on preparing for this stuff. So some of these bigger companies, even if it's maybe not realistic, whether geographical or just maybe it's not right in your life at the moment, it's good to get experience with those companies. I'll say the job market is strong and with certain sort of regional aspects. I would love nothing more in my life than to come home. So I grew up in Barron County. None of my family has ever left Barron County. My parents had never flown until about a year ago. And basically I have a daughter now, and they wanted to see her. So they flew for the first time. So that was something for them. But I would love to come back home. And I probably will at maybe sooner than later. I don't know. I just love the area so much. There are certainly regional specialization. So like healthcare is obviously a huge industry, insurance, that sort of stuff. You can obviously create your own job, that sort of thing. That's actually something maybe I'd love to do again at some point. I didn't enjoy the whole experience of starting a company back in like 2008, but I learned a ton. And the next time I do it, I'll be better at it. I'm still dealing with a couple of, like, I didn't have a retail business, but I had to send in like sales tax documents. So when I shut down the company, I didn't send one in, and now they're still badgering me about it. That stuff will happen. So that's another experience that I've even had people ask about that sort of thing in interviews. So, but I find the job market is pretty great. I think the key for anyone though is getting experience under your belt during that process. I think a lot of the websites are good. Job boards where you reach out independently to each sort of one are actually way tougher, I find. I sort of did like a hit list of places that I was interested in. And like I said, Pandora was at the top. And so I actually held off. There were a few other companies that I actually cared a bit about. And I held those off until later in the process as well. Because I understood at that point that after interviewing enough people, hiring a few people, you don't always do well. Even people who are qualified for the job don't always do the best in interviews. So, yeah.
Thanks.
Any more questions? Last chance, we're getting kind of close.
How would you say that Center and its educational approach uniquely equipped you for the professions you're in currently? And that could be to either one of you. Brian, I know earlier you said there were a few Center experiences, maybe the study abroad, chance to network and look at different markets elsewhere was helpful. But is there anything else uniquely to Center that you feel like catered to your current success?
A couple of things. Center really impacted my writing ability. So I was a pretty poor writer when I came. Not to say I was a great writer when I left, but I was certainly improved. So write as much as you can. I took several creative writing classes in different on campus and off campus while I was there. That's key. Of course, you can, that's going to help you no matter what you do, no matter where you go. And likewise reading. Cultivating a love for reading. But then combining those two things, the last point I would make is that analytical ability that Center cultivates is absolutely key. And so embrace that opportunity to develop that. And really, of course, you can develop that almost anywhere, but Center, I think, is unique in how it helps students ask the right questions. And so I think a lot of times, that comes across particularly in job interviews. And so, in interviews, you're hearing a question but I think most folks aren't really adept at assessing the question. So questioning the question. And that really is where you can set yourself apart. And so having that, center really helps you develop that kind of social intelligence to question the question in an appropriate way, in a way that really helps you get to an analysis that says, what is it that's really being asked here? What's driving this person to ask this question? What information are they really looking for? And so, again, that's a long way of saying that's unique. That's a unique aspect of center I find. And that's going to help you not only in interviews, but it's going to help you as you develop your career as well.
Yeah, to piggyback on that, I think Brian hit it perfectly with the writing comments first as well. I feel like generally communication is important no matter what you do. I don't often sit down and write a lot of letters still or anything like that, but even if you have the right technical answer, but you can't communicate it well, doesn't matter. Same thing with interviews, whether it's, a code review, something like that. So, if I go and propose and I will probably today, a few changes to the code base, being able to write up notes, write up, whether it could be like a one-line comment, but knowing how to take knowledge and distill it down into what actually matters, that's like a lost art, I feel like. And that's something that the liberal arts education, I think, emphasizes better than anything. It was funny, Brian mentioned sort of following his girlfriend at some point. I probably only went to center because my girlfriend was going to Berea, and that's now my wife. We had dated through high school. I'm not sure, I had no business going to center. My parents didn't go to college, that sorts of stuff. But I'm so thankful for that weird decision to follow. I just wanted to be close to my girlfriend, a 30-minute drive to Berea. So, gosh, it worked out because I became a much better communicator, just sort of trial by fire. You're not going to go through center and be ignored or be able to hide in the back of the class, which I probably often would prefer to do.
Thank you.
I guess that's it. Thank you both very much.
It's been great to be with you guys. Enjoyed it very much.
Same. And it's great to be, I've never met Brian before, so it's cool to meet him too. Good seeing a lot of familiar faces, and you all look very smart.
Illusions are powerful.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
See ya.
Good to be with you.
Yeah, same. See ya.
Really? Nice.
Is there an destination?
Oh, what was he?
Oh, you didn't get over.